Hi, it's Cara here. Thank you for returning to Bed of Lies. I just wanted to let you know that Telegraph subscribers can binge this series of Bed of Lies now. Click on the link in the show notes to find out how to connect your Telegraph subscription with Apple Podcasts. On the shores of Belfast Lough, there's an old tobacco factory. It's 11 miles from Belfast city centre, in a town called Carrickfergus. This sprawling 17-acre compound is hidden behind high walls that are fortified with barbed wire. Officially, it's called Sea Park, but one source tells me he calls it the Edge of Darkness, because everything here feels black, from the deep waters of the loch to the capes and guns of the guards. Somewhere in the bowels of Sea Park is the Vault, a store of millions of classified documents that together tell the history of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Evidence of kidnaps, murders, bombings, and collusion. It's meant to be an impenetrable fortress.
This was the most secure place in Northern Ireland, allegedly.
At the beginning of 1990, Detective John Stevens is running a sensitive investigation here, looking into a string of controversial killings.
I had my own office at one end, and then we had a kind of storage place where very secure papers were.
Northern Ireland's riven apart. Armed groups have been clashing violently for more than 20 years. Catholic Republicans on one side, Protestant Unionists on the other. All over whether the country should stay part of the United Kingdom.
It was an extremely hard, harsh environment.
4 months into his investigation, John Stevens has gathered enough evidence to arrest a network of Unionist fighters for the murders he's looking into. The operation's planned for 6 a.m, and he's in his hotel room trying to relax. He has a bath and gets ready for bed. But just as he's about to drift off, a sharp knock punctures the calm. Opening the door in his pyjamas, he sees a colleague.
He said, we won't believe it, but our headquarters are in flames.
Their office is on fire.
I said, what? I said, I'm going straight away down there. Come on, we're going down.
John races out of the hotel into a cold, drizzly night. The local officer who's come to pick him up smells of smoke, and he's carrying a machine gun. It takes a lot to shake John, but at this moment, he's scared.
The people who did this, would they actually try and get us on the way there?
As the building comes into view, he sees smoke billowing out from the parts where his inquiry's based.
We went straight in, and this inspector said, no, you can't go, it's too dangerous. I said, get out of my way, I'm going up there. No one's going to stop me going up there.
The room's worse than he could have imagined. Computers have melted, filing cabinets buckled, and documents disintegrated into ash. Standing there in his smouldering office,
in the kind of ashes of my headquarters,
John surveys the wreckage, the destroyed evidence they've spent months gathering. There's a palpable sense of threat. A senior officer in the Northern Irish Police comes up behind him. This officer needs to make a confession. He leans in to whisper. He's about to reveal a secret that'll change John's whole perspective. Not only has he been lied to, the whole country's been kept in the dark. A clandestine unit of the British Army is connected to the murders he's investigating. And they probably caused the fire.
I couldn't believe part of the British establishment would come and set fire to headquarters.
John realises the terrorists aren't the only people he needs to look into. He also needs to look at the establishment.
It gave us that iron determination to continue that job to the full.
I can hear it in your voice when you talk about it, how angry it makes you.
It does make me angry, actually. Yeah, it does.
Over the coming months, his investigation into those controversial killings, and now the fire, will spiral. And it will end up taking the best part of 2 decades.
And it got bigger and bigger and bigger.
For the past year, I've been back and forth to Northern Ireland, speaking with bereaved families, lawyers, police officers, military veterans, whistleblowers, and even double agents, investigating that clandestine unit of the British Army and its connection to a series of unsolved murders. To this day, questions remain. Do you think the general public have an understanding that this happened within our country?
I think some people will be absolutely astonished with what took place. It makes me shudder, to be frank. I think if you made a film of it, I don't think people would believe it, quite frankly.
Or a podcast.
Or a podcast, indeed.
It's a story of spies, lies, and the fight for justice. Why has the establishment gone to such lengths to cover up the truth? Like John Stevens, I'm determined to get to the bottom of it.
Go where the evidence takes you. And in this case, there's plenty of evidence.
Is there anyone that I should be wary of?
Everybody. It's scary, but on the other hand, it's all that more exciting and makes you more determined, doesn't it? But be on your guard.
I'm Cara McGoogan, and this is Bed of Lies, Episode 1, Trouble. When I think of the Troubles, I picture grainy archive footage. Children playing in the streets of Northern Ireland as soldiers patrol nearby. Kicking footballs around burnt-out cars and makeshift barricades. Fighters in black balaclavas, clutching guns. The Troubles refers to 30 years of violence that wrapped up with the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. But conflicts continue long after a ceasefire, and in Northern Ireland, the aftermath is still present. The memories, grief, scars and trauma. More than 3,500 people were killed, and 1,000 of those deaths are unsolved.
There's over 1,100 cases going through the courts at the minute, right? There could at least be another 2, 3, 4, 5,000 cases.
Among these unsolved cases, there's one type of atrocity I'm particularly interested in. I heard about it 5 years ago when I was investigating undercover police for the first series of Bed of Lies. That reporting revealed police had sexual relationships with women they were spying on. There was a parallel scandal in Northern Ireland of spies going to extremes to gather intelligence, but this involved killing people.
I wouldn't rule anything out when it comes to the British intelligence services. Anything's possible.
Kevin Winters is a leading human rights lawyer. He represents families seeking answers.
Next of kin are dying, and it's the next generation that's having to pick up the mantle and run with it.
We've been in regular contact for a couple of years, and he's put me in touch with a lot of his clients.
Hello.
Hi, Janita, it's Cara.
Hi, Cara. Sorry I missed you.
So you're doing podcasts then?
Yeah, so we're making a podcast series.
I don't know how much Kevin has told you.
I don't think I'm going to bother. I just had enough.
We've been doing a real phone tag today, haven't we?
That's right. Eventually our paths cross.
My brother, I could check and see if he's available too, if you want.
Nothing is black and white anywhere.
Case with Gavin at the minute, for collusion, but it could take a year or two.
That's very good to be starting with. Yeah, I'm probably going to have more
Good to be starting with it for fuck's sake.
I'll see you tomorrow at 3.
Thank you for covering it. Bye-bye.
Yes, no
Bye.
problem. Thank you, bye.
Anyway, we'll be fine.
Well, no, okay, good. Should we take our shoes off?
No, you're grand. Do you want to eat tea or coffee?
The tea would be amazing.
Tea?
Okay, this is Gavin.
Hi,
Gavin. Nice to meet you. Michelle Bond and Gavin Power are siblings, and I'd come to see them at Michelle's house in the countryside one afternoon in late October. Gavin's the younger sibling. He's never told his story before.
It's important to get our voices out because I can't tell you how often in my mind I replay all the events, all the details, and I can't get closure because I've got pieces of information, but I keep going over it in my mind thinking that I might spot something or see something.
Sitting in Michelle's living room with our cups of tea, it's immediately clear how close they are.
We are kind of like twins, aren't we?
Michelle and Gavin were both children of the 80s.
I'm a big 80s movie fan. I can remember watching with my dad, you know, the Ghostbusters and things like that there. So.
Their dad, Michael Power, was a taxi driver, and their mum Bernadette volunteered in a primary school.
We had a lovely family, a very happy childhood, holidayed in Spain, and Emma came along in 1987, shortly before.
Emma's the youngest. She comes by later, but doesn't join the interview.
I wondered if you could just show me some pictures of your dad.
Dad and my mum.
Oh, wow.
The photo's brightly coloured. There's a backdrop of trees and Bernadette's in a turquoise miniskirt. Around Michael's neck, there's a silver necklace with a crucifix. His shirt's unbuttoned halfway, and he's stroking Bernadette's hair affectionately as they beam into the camera.
He's got long, luscious locks, actually, yeah.
Yeah, you'd think he was from California. He doesn't look Irish at all, does he?
He was quite good looking. He was very, very blonde, you know, the 70s look with the flared jeans and the long blonde hair.
Yeah, the sort of checked shirt and the jeans tucked in. How old were they when they met?
14 or 15.
Oh, right, real school sweethearts.
Yeah.
When did they get married?
I think they were 21.
They were young.
What was your dad like? Can you tell me a bit about him?
Everybody knew him in the street. He would have been friendly to everyone. And he loved his family. He had big brothers and sisters, and he seen them every day.
Michael was also a devout Catholic. His daily routine included praying with his family and going to church. Each week he fasted.
We went to Mass every Sunday and played out in the street.
It was all young families, so our area was littered with kids all around the same age.
And what were your experiences of the Troubles growing up?
Because we were born into it, and you would have seen it completely as normal, because we'd never known anything different.
Northern Ireland was segregated along religious lines. Catholics and Protestants mostly lived separately, and their children went to different schools.
Whereabouts did you grow up?
We grew up in West Belfast.
A Catholic area.
Most people in West Belfast were normal mothers, young mothers and fathers trying to rear their children.
But they were living within a conflict that had been raging for nearly 20 years. The Troubles kicked off in 1968. Civil rights marches swept countries in the West, and Northern Ireland was no different. Catholics were a minority, making up about a third of the population in an otherwise Protestant country.
The Union Jack, symbol of Northern Ireland's union with England, flies everywhere as Protestants prepare for the great Orange Day parades commemorating the Boyne victory.
Catholics faced discrimination in work, housing, and even political representation, and they wanted equal rights.
In some areas, the unemployment rate runs as high as 20% of the working population.
Unlike in the rest of the UK, voting was limited to people with property. Some people could vote twice if they also owned a business. But Catholics had limited opportunities to buy houses, let alone run businesses. So many couldn't vote at all.
A great many of the civil rights complaints about vote rigging, inequality of housing and job opportunity.
So, the One Man, One Vote campaign began.
The civil rights movement inevitably captured massive support.
Thousands of people took to the streets. At the heart of it all, many Catholics believed they'd have better rights as part of a united Ireland, which had gained independence from Britain in 1921. They were Republicans. Police broke up protests with batons, and clashes with counter-protesters became violent.
Civil rights degenerated into battles of the crudest kind in Belfast, Londonderry and other towns.
Well, it changed. You could almost describe it overnight.
The guns came out and the whole place went bananas.
Quite quickly then, that whole area was taken over by the militants on both sides, the Provisional IRA.
The IRA, or Irish Republican Army, demanded an end to British rule and would use physical force to achieve that goal.
And there was the Loyalists on the other side.
Loyalists, or Unionists, were loyal to the Crown. and wanted to protect the United Kingdom. They picked up arms to fight the IRA. Civilians were caught in a deadly confluence.
And a lot of houses were burnt out in West Belfast along the Falls Road.
It's not safe anymore. You're going to have to move. It was becoming extremely dangerous.
Suddenly we were facing 700 thereabouts murders.
There's a very peculiar smell and it stays in your mind forever.
10,000 odd shooting incidents.
Of people's homes been burnt and that has since been doused with the water.
And about 1,600 odd bombing incidents.
That smell is ingrained like an indelible stain in the sensory recesses of my brain.
The police service, in a sense, was totally overwhelmed.
In Belfast, the British Army is once again back in the old routine.
Prime Minister Harold Wilson sent the British Army to Northern Ireland in 1969 to help keep the peace.
It seems like a bad dream, but for 5 weeks, Belfast has been a city full of barricades, barbed wire and soldiers.
Then there was army checkpoints and everybody getting into the town was searched.
The army's presence added fuel to the fire.
And, you have the likes of Bloody Sunday, where innocent civilians were murdered.
Appearing to be dead, there are the 3 in that Saracen car. There are 2 men lying at the end of this block of flats. There's another man at least very close to being dead. There's one.
It was a situation whereby there was civil war.
Frequently there was sirens, there was loud bangs.
Your survival instincts were heightened. The idea of looking over your shoulder or varying your routine, there was a real fear that someone could attack you.
We didn't have mobile phones. When people left the house, you never knew what happened to them till they come back to the house.
5 children in my class had their fathers murdered.
The New Lodge Road was the most dangerous road in Europe. Every pub had been blown up.
The Europa Hotel was bombed a few times.
There was a pub called the Starry Plough. It was blown up.
Europe's most bombed hotel.
And then McGurk's was blown up. The Shandon was blown up.
And the Spion.
The Spion was blown up.
The debris literally just sort of flew into the air, twirling upwards, ever upwards, in slow motion, until it then came crashing down.
Nobody foreseen that this was going to last for 30 years, or I probably would have been on the aircraft or boat out of here looking for life somewhere else.
The pressure of living within this conflict started to take its toll on Michelle and Gavin's dad, Michael Power. He was a taxi driver, which was a dangerous job back then. Gavin says,
the loyalists came out with a statement more or less saying that taxi drivers to them would be considered as legitimate targets because they're moving around in many different areas.
Michael would pick up anyone, including Protestants and even fighters, and take them to parts of Belfast that were normally off limits to Catholics. But by the summer of 1987, he was agitated. Baby Emma was nearly 4 months old. Life should have been happy, but he felt intensely stressed.
He was pacing the floors at night and he started to have night terrors where he was jumping out of bed saying, they've shot me.
One day, Michael asked his daughter Michelle to sit down. His face was serious and he said to her gravely,
if anybody ever comes to the front door of this house, you're never to answer it. You're never ever to go to the front door of the house. Even if you think it's your friends, you're always to come and speak to me or your mum.
On Sunday, the 23rd of August, 1987, the Power family were getting ready for church.
It was a beautiful day. It was a Sunday. We were going to Mass as normal.
They put on their best clothes. Michelle was 8 and Gavin was 5.
Dad was combing my hair and he made a comment about how women like men that comb their hair back and take pride in their appearance.
The final strands of blonde hair in place, the family clambered into the car for the short drive to church. Being the eldest, Michelle got to sit up front. She was playfully showing her dad a new toy that did tricks.
Oh, Dad, look what I can do magic. You know, he was joking over his shoulder saying, Brenda, can you hear this? She can do magic.
Bernadette was in the back with baby Emma on her lap. Gavin was next to them. He had his head hanging out the window when he noticed a white car coming up behind.
They hit the corner at full speed without slowing down. That it looked like one of the wheels lost traction. I was like, Mum, there's a really fast car behind us. And then they drew up alongside us. You would have thought that they were racing us, you know, like two cars parallel. It looked like to me that he had a hat on and then he pulled it down over his face. So it was a balaclava that he had rolled up, pulled it down. As they went parallel to us, they threw the front of their car in front of our path.
The next thing I remember is the car coming to a violent emergency stop and being jolted forward.
There were 3 adult men in the car, all dressed in black.
Almost in slow motion, Gavin saw one of the men lift up a gun, a long-barreled shotgun, normally used for hunting.
Now, obviously, this all happened quite quickly, but for me, it's very much frame by frame. He had the weapon pointed, first of all, into the backseat at me. So I thought I was the primary target, and I knew that he was going to shoot. But then he redirected the weapon to make sure it was pointed at Dad. I was completely petrified, and then I ducked just before he fired the first shot. The first shot blew out the front windows, the 2 front windows. The noise was deafening.
I mean, we couldn't hear, it was just that ringing in your ears. To me, it was just like silence with the ringing, the constant ringing.
When you fire a shotgun, it sprays. Almost like if you were to put your thumb over a hose, you know, the top of a hose at high pressure, and it kind of sprays out in all directions.
The shrapnel hit my eyes, so I actually couldn't see. I just was in immediate pain.
I felt like they've missed me, and I kept myself low under the back seat. My mum was trying to hide Emma. And then the second shot went off, equally as deafening. And then that was when the front windscreen then came through as well.
I put my fingers to my eyes. Nothing was kind of alleviating the pain because the shrapnel was inside all different parts of my eye. And so I kind of started to use my 2 index fingers, you know, just to flick my eyelids. And that then some of the shrapnel in the glass was falling out. And that then allowed me to see glimpses, you know, of the horrific scene.
That was the headshot that they fired through the windscreen, striking my father.
My father was covered in blood. There was just blood everywhere. The blood was all over him, it was all over the car. I didn't want to leave him. I tapped him on his arm and was calling his name, and, you know, he didn't respond, obviously.
When I got out of the car, I felt so alone. I just ran down the street. I remember just shouting, they've missed me, but they've got my dad. They've missed me, but they got my dad.
After some time, I felt my way out of the door, and I used my hands outstretched as a guide to move forward because there was nobody about. And I used my right arm. I ran it along the wall, the neighbour's wall at the top of the street. And eventually I kept walking down the street, and then I felt myself being picked up by one of our neighbours. And he was, you know, reassuring me, it's okay, Michelle, you're going to be okay. And he literally ran. I just felt, you know, just the feel of somebody running with you. And then, you know, being in the car and being taken to the hospital.
Michael Power died of a gunshot wound to the head. He was 31 years old. The coroner found 50 entry holes in his right shoulder from where the shotgun had sprayed. The Bible he carried was soaked in blood. To this day, his silver necklace is still stained.
Even in all the brutal acts of the Troubles, this was up there with one of the worst atrocities.
Sitting on the sofa in her living room, Michelle shows me a newspaper from the week of the shooting.
This is one reported on myself. It says Gurliet doesn't know her father is dead, and it's talking with the nursing staff that they've been warned not to tell the child of her father's death.
Michelle's mum, Bernadette, was now a widow at the age of 30, with 3 children to raise. Their young family shattered.
Both of my eyes were injured, my right and left eye. The thought that I was going to be left blind in my right eye.
She was taken into surgery. Her eye was removed to fix the damage caused by the fragments of glass.
My eyes have been left scored like a football pitch. You know, there's just lines everywhere. I was very thankful not to actually lose my sight. But I still have pieces of glass lodged underneath my eye and shrapnel in the bone above my right eye. And it does cause me discomfort, ongoing discomfort.
Michelle slowly recovered and was ready to go home. But her mum had to break terrible news to her.
They explained that my dad had died that day.
That must have been devastating.
I actually was in complete shock, to the sense that I was devoid of all emotion at that point. I actually felt numb, but I couldn't really actually take on board what I was being told. I didn't fully appreciate it, and I remember that just this overwhelming sense of sadness then, and it's something that kind of probably has never really left me, if I'm honest, that overwhelming sense of sadness that can just come upon you at any time.
Back at home, Michelle and her family were haunted by signs of the attack.
Every single time I got a bath as a child following that incident, the bottom of the bath, when the water drained, was filled with glass.
So much glass had showered over Michelle, it felt like she'd never be able to get it all out of her hair.
And there was glass for a long, long time, and I remember as a child thinking, oh, there's no glass, on one occasion, and then, it stopped.
Months passed. The Power family struggled to put the pieces of their lives back together.
So our life went from being a really good life, a good family life, to absolute chaos and destruction and despair.
I was convinced they were coming back. That never left me. For a long, long time, that stayed with me.
Gavin used to wake up screaming at the top of his voice, screaming, they're coming, the bad men are here.
As Gavin's screams pierced the nighttime silence, another noise started to ring out.
It was really, really loud.
Someone was repeatedly calling them.
At 2 and 3 in the morning. And then we would hear my mum crying and shouting and saying, what do you want, what do you want? Leave me alone, leave me alone. We changed our telephone number 5 times over it, and those calls kept coming.
When the family woke up, bleary-eyed from the disturbed night's sleep, and got ready for school, they did so knowing they'd soon have to get in the car. The same car their father had been shot in. Even though it was blood-stained and peppered with bullet holes, their mum Bernadette simply didn't have the money for a new one. With all this going on, she couldn't think about why her husband Michael had been killed on that Sunday. Gavin explains she still finds it hard to talk about today.
When I see my mother operating out of pain and in her suffering, that really does ring a bell within me that I want this case to go to fruition, and I want her pain and the suffering to be acknowledged.
It was clear Michael's death wasn't a random attack.
The killers were waiting in the street.
The gunmen knew Michael would be going to church, just as he always did, and they plotted accordingly. They waited around the corner, and when Michael pulled out, they sped up behind him, gun at the ready.
What was known at the time about what had happened to your dad?
Well, the general public at the time knew that he was shot dead by loyalist paramilitaries. If you imagine our street.
Michelle and Gavin have an incredible recall of that August day. Despite being so young, their memories are almost visceral. But for the bigger picture, I've been going through old newspapers.
So here, this one says, Catholic taxi driver gunned down. It's a piece about Michael's funeral. And there were hundreds of people there. And his widow, Bernadette, afterwards, she called for an end to the violence. And this is a quote, "If they could see how they've left me, maybe they'd stop the killing." This one has details of the shooting. "Maniacs kill dad," it's the headline. A caller to a Belfast newspaper claimed the UDA was responsible for his murder.
The UDA, or Ulster Defence Association, was the biggest loyalist paramilitary, an illegal army that backed the British state. The UDA might not be a familiar acronym, but it's important to remember, along with their sworn enemy, the IRA. The UDA's tactics were brutal, including extortion, criminality, terrorism, and the killing of Catholic civilians.
The UDA seemed to claim that Michael was in the IRA, but with everything I know, that doesn't sound right. It's a bit surprising. They said he was killed in revenge for an IRA shooting of a Protestant soldier, but there's lots of denials here. Family and friends say Mr. Power had no connections with the Republican movement, and that includes Sinn Féin, the political wing of the IRA, which says he had nothing to do with them. They all seem to say the same thing, that all he lived for was his family.
The denial was so firm, it was even echoed by the priest at Michael's funeral.
Michael's life has been taken away, but the truth about his lifestyle must never be taken away. It must stand. It must never be taken away by lies. The truth must not be sacrificed. His murder must never be made to appear palatable to people who would seek to make it so.
In the wake of Michael's death, people called for the UDA to be banned. But the Loyalist group wouldn't become a prescribed terror organisation for another 5 years. In the meantime, they were only just beginning on a trail of high-profile murders, gaining a seemingly unstoppable momentum. 2 of those murders aroused suspicions of a bigger problem behind UDA violence. They led to a massive inquiry, one that helped expose a shadowy network of players who conspired in Michael's murder and many others. It's something lawyer Kevin Winters is still looking into today.
I can't operate unless I get breakfast, but I wake very early. I've been awake from 4 o'clock this morning.
Bloody hell.
Yeah, so I like to have my work done by 9 o'clock so that I can get into all the other stuff I have to do.
It's fair to say Kevin's a bit of a workaholic.
Yeah, if I get 5 hours unbroken, I'm good, you know.
That's not a lot of sleep each night.
It's nuts, I know.
Yeah, I'm like a need 8 hours girl, so I'll never be a top shot lawyer.
You're always on. I'm on all the time. On red alert, sort of state of readiness. Sort of First World War trenches.
Kevin's a thorn in the side of everyone who wants to put the Troubles to bed. Loyalists, the IRA, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, the Ministry of Defence, and the government, to name a few.
There's just every type of killing, atrocity that you can think of from the inception of the Troubles right through to more recent times we deal with in this office.
How long have you been in that sort of mode doing this kind of work?
After Pat was killed, overnight, a job became a vocation.
Pat Finucane was one of Kevin's first bosses back in 1989 and a founder of the law firm Madden and Finucane, which focused on crime and human rights.
Pat was an excellent advocate. There was a sense of fun with him. He had a light way with him, with people. He had a good empathy for people, for clients, for cases, for issues. So I learned a lot on the way he conducted himself.
Pat was Catholic, his wife Geraldine Protestant. Mixed marriages like theirs weren't that common back then, but he was happy to stand out. He came from a Republican family. 2 of his brothers were interned in prison as suspected members of the IRA, and a third was convicted. So when Pat became a lawyer, he'd chosen to go in a different direction.
What sort of clients did he have, the types of people he was representing, the workers?
Well, there would have been a lot of people from North and West Belfast. There would have been a lot of people from a nationalist Republican background. But he was also very good at acting for everybody who came through the door. And he acted for people from all sorts of sectors, including people from the loyalist community.
One of Pat's best-known clients was IRA prisoner Bobby Sands, the hunger striker who was elected as the youngest Member of Parliament, then died less than a month later. But on the 12th of February 1989, Pat would become renowned for a very different reason.
Sunday night, it was just after 7 o'clock, I think, and I got a phone call from one of my colleagues. I lifted the phone, and his first words to me were, "Pat Finucane's been shot dead." And then there was just stunned silence.
Geraldine Finucane was wounded in the shooting. Their 3 children witnessed their father's murder. They were eating dinner together when the terrorists burst into their home and shot Patrick 14 times.
The country was rocked by Pat's death. Lawyers had long represented people from both sides, but now even they weren't off limits.
All people working in this sector felt under threat.
Kevin started checking under his car for explosives and changing his routine to make sure no one could track him.
It was a dark, depressing time to practice law.
Like with Michael Power, the UDA accused Pat Finucane of having been in the IRA.
You've seen him, he's an IRA man in a suit, and that's the sort of thing was levelled against Pat.
And there were threats to him before he was killed.
You know that he's going to be taken out.
As Kevin and Pat's family started to process what had happened, one thing became clear.
That he was targeted.
That word, targeted, was starting to take on a new meaning in 1989. This was the first murder that aroused suspicion. The second came 6 months later. Reporter John Ware was driving to the south of France. He'd spent 15 years covering the Troubles from Belfast, first for the Sun newspaper, then for BBC's Panorama. As he crossed the countryside, he had the radio playing, and there was news of another killing.
One woman who didn't want to be identified spoke of what she'd heard.
And I heard like glass breaking. And I stood on, waited a wee minute, and then I heard bang, bang, bang. I think it was about 5 bangs. And that was about
a young man called Lachlan McGinn had been shot at his home as he was eating, if I remember rightly, a Chinese takeaway, watching television with his wife.
It had all the hallmarks of another gruesome shooting.
2 men barreled through his sitting room window, chased him upstairs, shot him dead. His kids woke to see their father dying at the top of the stairs.
Within these cold-blooded details, there was something else that piqued John's interest. The report said the UDA killers had targeted Lachlan McGinn.
On the basis of leaked intelligence documents.
The UDA had used leaked intelligence documents from the police to identify and kill Lachlan. They had then shared copies of them publicly.
That was a real moment because, indeed, a document was produced. It wasn't a particularly highly classified document, but it listed Lachlan McGinn in some lowly intelligence gathering role for the IRA.
There were photos from police files, details about what car Lachlan drove and where he lived, as well as a video that allegedly showed he was in the IRA. The UDA said they were going to use this new intelligence to target people in the IRA, rather than random Catholic civilians. But exactly how the loyalist paramilitary group got their hands on this intelligence, and what was contained within it, is murky. It points to a bigger problem of the UDA getting help from the police and army. That's a link the Power family was starting to suspect as well.
You're panicking, and then you maybe settle yourself, and then comes the ringing of the bells. And
ever since Michael Power had been killed, his family had been plagued by those midnight calls. On one occasion, his widow, Bernadette, answered the phone, and there was a police officer on the other end of the line with a message for her.
The police said to her that she was making people very nervous driving about in my father's car.
That's Michelle. Her brother Gavin says,
They were warning us that we were in danger if we continue having the car, that the loyalist killers didn't want that car to be seen around in Murray anymore.
And my mum responded saying, good, I hope they're nervous.
But that wasn't the officer's point. They added,
no, what I'm saying is, you should be nervous.
The police appeared to be in contact with the killers, and they were delivering a threat to make Bernadette dispose of her car, the remaining evidence of Michael's murder, evidence the police weren't prepared to examine themselves.
There was still bullets left in the car, like not taken for evidence. So there was no attempt whatsoever to do anything about it, even in the car that we were shot in terms of gathering forensics. Their priority was catching the IRA, and if people got caught up in the mix, so be it.
Was there an investigation after he died?
I would say there was no investigation at all, in my opinion.
You could say the police hampered any attempt by any individual or any witness to come forward.
And so 4 decades later, no one has ever been held to account for Michael's death, his case languishing among 1,000 unsolved murders. This might all sound a bit far-fetched, the police making intimidating calls and failing to investigate a murder, but it's a picture that was sadly not uncommon during the Troubles. The police were mostly Protestant, and they didn't always act impartially. But it wasn't just the police. The army also seemed to have a vested interest in covering up the truth about Michael's death. A few weeks before the murder, an army checkpoint suddenly appeared at the end of the Power family's road. It was manned by local soldiers from the Ulster Defence Regiment, or UDR.
The whole idea of a checkpoint is to monitor people going in and out of Republican areas, and then they positioned it at the top of our street. It was just bizarre.
The soldiers at the checkpoint became increasingly hostile towards Michael.
They would often hassle my father and threaten my father and say to my father, you'll always take your family to mass, isn't that right, Mickey? And he was very, very nervous about that. So that really spooked him.
He was right to be spooked, because that checkpoint wasn't just on their street. It was
at the very specific point where my dad was murdered, and that checkpoint had been there every Sunday prior to his death for several weeks.
Then, on the day Michael died, the checkpoint disappeared.
Minutes before he was killed. Anybody with half a brain knew that the police and the UDR were connected to loyalists.
There were always rumours of collusion.
That word collusion comes up time and time again, and it underpins everything I'm looking into. It's at the centre of Michael's murder and those of Pat Finucane and Lachlan McGinn, as well as many more. It speaks to a cosy relationship between paramilitaries, the police and the army. But the collusion goes much deeper than police botching investigations and soldiers threatening civilians.
You've got the state's hands all over this at the beginning, the middle and the end.
Those police files leaked to the UDA contained vital evidence of collusion, evidence that led investigators to one man. The unravelling of who that man is and his relationship with that clandestine army unit revealed one of the biggest secrets of the Troubles, of people who straddled both sides, who killed innocent civilians while working for the army and police. From that fire at John Stevens' headquarters to the lawsuits of today, it's a story that was never supposed to get out.
There's a significant amount of evidence there. I think it's time.
That's my plan, to expose exactly what went on and answer a vital question. Is the state getting away with murder? Coming up on Bed of Lies.
He was a drinker, he was a psychopath. He really, really thought he was untouchable.
He was involved in the abduction and torture of Daddy. He is probably the most high-profile British agent.
There wasn't just one agent. Most of them were agents.
If you could recruit a terrorist, that's the cream on the cake.
To keep your cover, you need to do the business of terrorism, which is killing. The British handlers of agents like Steak Knife knew exactly what they were doing.
And they killed totally innocent people. Totally innocent people.
We have so many questions that are unanswered. People need to be held to account, particularly when it's the state.
Bed of Lies is written by me, Cara McGoogan, and produced by Sarah Peters at Tuning Fork Productions. The executive producers are Louisa Wells and Adelie Pojman-Ponte. Script editing by Venetia Rainey. Fact-checking by Mick Brown. Sound design by Peregrine Andrews, with thanks to Ryan Gudge, Louis Brady and Theodora Laludis. For more of my in-depth reporting, my book, The Poison Line, Life and Death in the Infected Blood Scandal, is out now with Penguin. If you haven't already done so, listen to the award-winning first 2 series of Bed of Lies on this feed, in which I investigate 2 very different scandals.